So now that we have a pretty good idea of how virtual environments works and how we can use Python in order to run SQL queries, create tables, do all of the SQL stuff, we're going to look at applying all this, putting it all together from start to finish, and showing it in a model web application. So, a full stack web application. This will be very, sparse, but should work. So, let's go ahead and get started from the beginning. So we'll start by creating a model of our data. So what we're gonna build. So our requirements are we need to build a blog that has posts. So you can create a post and then you can post it there, a blog post, and you also have authors. So that's the only two things we need to worry about. We have authors and we have blog posts. So an author can have many posts, but a post can only have one author. So we can start sketching this out. There are, a lot of ways to do this. You can just, do it on a whiteboard or a notebook or whatever. But we'll do it here. There's, I think this is a good tool, but there's a slight learning curve, which may be especially annoying when you're just also learning SQL. You have to learn this other tool at the same time. So however you want to do it is fine, but I'm going to do this here. So we know that we need two things. So we'll start out with just the tables. So we need to worry about filling that in later. So we've got authors, and we've got blog posts. Okay, so that's a good start. So we've got our two tables, and we know what they're called. So for an author, let's say basically for all these by default, let's just say we want them to have a primary key that's an ID. So ID, PK, and int. And in Postgres, we'll make this a serial, so it'll be auto incrementing. For here, we'll just leave it as an int. And an author will have a name as well. So, and that will be a string. So again, the specific type will be either a varchar or text. I think we'll just use text to keep things simple, but string. And blog post will also have an ID. That'll be the primary key. And a blog post will have a title and content. So those are the main things. So again, we're keeping this very simple. So title, something like text, and actually we'll just make it all text and content. We should be using varchar, but it's fine. So in addition to now we have our tables, at least the basic tables, but we need to somehow connect these tables. So we have a bunch of authors and we have a bunch of blog posts, but blog posts really should belong, a given blog post should belong to an author. So we need to relate these two tables somehow. So if we think about the relationship of an author can have lots and lots of blog posts. So the relationship from authors to blog posts is one to many. And the relationship from blog posts to authors is you have many blog posts with one author. So we can represent that using a foreign key. So we'll refer to the author ID. So an author is going to own a blog post, and that will be a foreign key. And we can use this notation for this tool to help us show that relationship. So we have this, you'll see this kind of notation in other tools, it's a common standard. So this is one. So this line here, this little line here, straight down, just means one, and this little crow's foot means many. So one author has many blog posts. So that's kind of how you can think about that. So I think we're basically done here. So we have I think we have a good model and a good understanding of what we're doing. So I'm gonna take a screenshot of that just so we can save it for later. We can have this for reference in case we need to. All right, so now we understand our model. So what we're going to do is there should be a link in the description with some starter code. So you can go ahead and, let's see, it should be GitHub / where's this? So here at GitHub / Chad Mowbray, and then psycopg_web app. And if you follow the README here, you can clone this, follow the README, so create a virtual environment, and you can refer to a previous video for more details. So create a virtual environment, then activate it, then install the requirements. So if you may remember pip freeze, so you can generate this requirements text by running pip freeze in your environment, and that will create a file that will allow other people to mimic all of the dependencies that you have for your project. So once you get that going, you should be able to follow along here. So this should be roughly where you are. All right, let's zoom in once. Okay, so here we can take a look. So a lot of this is going to be pre-built because we're not worried about the details. We just want to see kind of how the our database implementation works with everything else. Like, why bother having this Python wrapper around SQL? So we've got the requirements file, which just has one requirement, psycopg2, and then our script. So you don't need to worry about this, but this is just going to create. We'll have to fill out the details here. So it's going to drop a database, and so the first time you run this, you're going to get an error. You'll have to run it twice, and then Python, it's going to run the schema. So that's going to create a schema. It's going to populate the database that we're creating here, and then we're going to populate it with some initial data. Okay. So yeah, once we do that, we should be able to have a good idea of how everything is working. So in terms of the app, so that's up here. We have our app, we have a database and a server. So we're only going to really care about the database here, but just to show you, so our server, we have an index, the HTML, and there's not much going on. It's just a search form. So the idea here is that, so this might be like part of this web application where you can search for posts by a given author. So this is a very restricted slice of a web application. But so this would be the search page for. Actually, let me go ahead and just change that. Search page for finding all something like that. And I may update the repo to reflect this, depending. Okay, so so now we know what we're doing. This is a search page. So on this application, this might just be one particular endpoint, and we should be able to get all of the posts by a given author. So the server here, again, you don't need to worry about this. Next week we'll be looking into to doing something similar to this, where we're starting at a pretty low level. We'll be starting at a lower level than this, in fact. So this is not something you would use in production. But so we just have a class, and we're going to take a look at the query parameter. So if you do a search, just like if you do a Google search and there's a little question mark at the end, and then there's a search term. Again, we don't need to worry about this, but we can take a look at it. So it's going to grab whatever the person searches for, and then it's going to call this function, get posts by author, which we're going to be importing from database.query, which we're going to have to write soon. So if there's no search query, it's just going to produce the basic form, which is going to have the basic HTML, which is just going to have a form. And if once they submit the form, they're going to get JSON back, which should have a list of results. So this may seem a little complicated. I mean, this is getting closer to modeling a real application, but we don't really need to worry about the details. This is just kind of there for us automatically. All right, the database. This is what we really care about. So this is where we're going to have to work and fill in the blanks. So we're going to have to populate, we'll start with the schema. So we're going to have to create a schema for a database, which we've already thought about, so we shouldn't have to do too much work there. So our schema is right here. So that should be good. I'm going to go ahead and, well, that's fine. Okay, so we have our schema, and so we just need to implement that using psycopg. And then our initial data, so we're going to populate again with our initial data. So we run the script, it's going to create the schema, and it's going to populate with the initial data. And then maybe the most important thing, which is kind of ties into what we're doing, is we're going to have to be able to, we're going to write that function that our server is calling, get posts by author. So we're going to have to we're going to have to get a query parameter. So someone types something into a search bar, it gets sent as a query parameter as part of the request. We pull out that query parameter, and then we use that to customize a search that we're going to make to our database. So let's go ahead and get started with our schema. So our schema, to remind everyone, so we've got authors and blog posts, and authors have a name, and blog posts have a title, a content, and an author ID. So let's start with authors. I think that's the simpler thing to do. All right, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time because a lot of the basics here was referenced in the earlier video on psycopg2. So we're going to go ahead and we'll have a try finally block, and well, we'll start with the with statement, and we'll add the try finally later. So we'll do with psycopg2. Actually, I'm sorry. Before I do this, I actually haven't installed all of the. I don't have my environment set up, so I'm gonna have to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create a virtual environment. Python -m venv my venv. Okay, so now let's see. I've got my virtual environment up here, and my gitignore is picking it up because I have named it my venv. If you want to change that name, that's fine. Just change it in the gitignore as well. Okay, so I've got my visual environment. Now I need to activate it. So source. So source the name, and then bin and activate. So now it's activated. Okay, so once it's activated, I need to install all of the requirements that I have. In this case, it's just one, but we'll go ahead and install install it anyway. There could be a whole bunch. So Python, sorry, not Python, pip install -r requirements.txt, and that should install in just a second. Okay, so now we should be good to go. We should have access to psycopg2. So here we're going to use a with statement, and we're going to create a connection object, or like an instance of the connection class. So connect, and I'm going to paste this in just because I don't want to type it. Okay, and we'll do that. So again, this is just the name we happen to give it. If you want to change this name, you can change it in the script as well. And we'll have another with statement, so another context manager for the cursor. All right. So we've got this. Then we're going to execute some statements. So cur.execute, and I'm just going to leave that there as a placeholder. So you may recall that the connection actually doesn't close from the context manager. Unfortunately, the things are committed, and if there's an error, there'll be a rollback automatically, and the cursor is closed, but the connection is not. So we have to specifically close the connection. And if we want to be very proper, we can wrap all this in a try finally block. So try finally. Okay, so now if whatever happens, this connection will close. We're not going to have a database connection floating around. All right. So what we need to do here is create we need to create our two tables. So the first table we should create is authors. So let's just do that now. So all we're going to do is just pass in the SQL command as a string. So create table authors, and we'll have an ID will be a serial, and it'll be the primary key. And we'll have a name, which will be of the type text because we're being imprecise. Okay, so that will create us a table. Let me go ahead and get this little breathing room here. All right, so we're going to create an authors table. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to create a blog posts table. This should be. We're going to create a blog post table, and that's also going to have an ID serial primary key, but it's not going to have a name. It's going to have a title text. Let's see, what's it going to have? It's going to have a title, content, and author ID. So title, and all these are going to be text, just for the sake of simplicity here. Content will also be text. And finally, we have our author ID. Again, we could do a separate, excuse me, we could do a separate statement. We could do an alter table statement at the end, but I'll just include it here. So our author ID is going to be an integer, and it's going to reference author's ID. Okay, so this is just normal SQL, and you wouldn't want to do this in production, but you might be running this multiple times. So I'm just going to go ahead and include a couple drop statements. So cur drop table if exists. new blog posts, and we'll do authors as well. Okay, so we're 1R. So yeah, so we're gonna check if our tables exist. If they do, we'll drop them. And again, this is just for development purposes. And then we're gonna create the new table that is gonna match the schema that we decided on here. A one-to-many relationship. Okay, so we can try just executing that. And let's do, so we'll have to create the database first. So create DB, and that was what? Blog DB. Okay, so now I should be able to create it again. Creating a fresh database, and then I can try running this schema. So Python. Okay, I run it. I don't get any output, but we'll have to go ahead and check it. So PSQL, and that will be blogdb. Let's see what's in here. Oops. Okay, we have authors. Looks like everything worked. So I'm satisfied that this worked. Okay, so that's good for our schema. Now what we'll do is we need to populate that data. So we can actually just, and feel free to pause here and give the initial data a try. Just create a couple entries. Even if you don't get to the point of specifically writing entries, just go ahead and give that a try. Okay, so hopefully you've given that a try. I'm going to paste this in just as a starter. So we're going to have to repeat the same process, right? So when we ran our schema, we created a new connection object, we created a new cursor, we executed some stuff, but we closed the connection after we're done. So now our database is closed. So if we want to do anything with the database again, we're going to have to reopen this connection. So we'll reopen it. We'll do all the same things, and we're going to execute. We're going to execute some commands. But instead of creating tables, we're going to be inserting. We're going to do insert statements. So we can create a couple authors. Let's create a couple authors first. So insert into authors. And authors just has one, so it has an ID that's going to be auto incremented, but it just has a name. So that one's pretty simple, and the values, that will be this string interpolation kind of thing, and now we'll tell it what we want. So we only have one value, so this is a tuple. So we have to have a trailing comma, otherwise it won't work. So just something to watch out for. If you have a tuple with only one element, you need a trailing comma. Okay, we'll copy this and we'll add another author. So we'll have Bob and Sally. All right, so we got our two authors here, hopefully. Now we're going to insert some blog posts. So we're going to insert into blog posts. So insert into blog posts. And just slightly more complicated, but not too bad. So we've got a title, content, and author ID. So title, content, author ID. And the values are going to be whatever we want. So values will be 3 of these. Okay, and then just like the other one, we're going to have to pass in a tuple with the actual values that we want. So we'll go with something very boring like first post, just so we know what we're looking at when we see it. And we're going to specifically, ideally what we would do is do another query or something like that, so when we're looking for an author, but for now we're just going to hard code this foreign key. So we can copy this. So we'll execute or insert like 3. So first post, we'll do second, third, second, third, and this one will be Sally's. All right, so now I've got three posts and 2 authors. So that should be good. We could probably run our script. I think everything in here should work at this point. So let's try using that. Can't open file, database initial data.py. Script. Oh, I gotta change this. Sorry. App slash, you'll probably have to add this on. App slash. Okay, so that script ran. Again, nothing happened, so just to make sure that that's actually worked, so going to the database. Okay, looks like we have, so let's select star from authors. Okay, we get Bob and Sally, and select star from, I think this is actually case insensitive, so so blog post, and then if we wanted to do a join, for example, we could do select star from, let's do blog posts, select star from blog post, join authors on blog post has author underscore ID. On that equals the author's ID. So we're just doing a normal join statement here. We're going to join blog posts and authors, and when the foreign key author ID on blog posts is the same thing as the author ID, which is going to give us everything, but we can see, so that works. So what we're actually going to want for our web application is we don't want all of this stuff. We don't care about IDs. Let's just say we want the title and the content. So reminder, our application, ultimately what we're going to be doing is we want someone to be able to search for a given author and get all the posts by that author. So we just want the posts, or let's just say the posts and the author. So you go down here and we'll do title and content. Okay, so that looks good. So I think we can probably use this query. to end up getting what we want. So probably when we write our query, wherever that is, this query, we're going to have to do something like that. All right, so I think our schema is good, our initial data is good, and let's go ahead and take care of our query now. So again, I will pause briefly, and please attempt this yourself. Okay, so I'm going to do what I did before and just copy all this because a lot of the boilerplate is the same. We're not really going for efficiency or beauty of code here, just something that works for now. So boilerplate, we're gonna have to have a connection and all that, but so there's gonna be a slight difference here. Recall that our server expects a function. It's going to call a function that comes from database.query. So get posts by author. We're going to have to write a function here. Get posts by author, and we're going to take in a parameter, which is going to be it's basically going to be the author that they search for. That may not be totally obvious here. And it probably should be. So if I were to refactor this, I would change that. But for now, we'll do, let's see. Like that. We can put all this inside. All right, and we have ourselves a function. So we got this post author, and we're not going to be inserting. We're going to be querying. So we'll do a select statement. So you can just basically write what we had before. I'm going to break this up a little bit. So we'll do our base query. So we're going to have to pre-write some of this. We've got a specialized function here. I'm just going to copy to save time. All right, so the base query, we've got our select statement. So select title content, just like we had down here from blog posts, join authors on author ID equals author ID, where name is, and we're going to have to fill this in. This is going to come from the user of our application ultimately. Okay, so we got our base query, and let's get the user data. So we have to pass in a tuple, even if we just have one thing. So user data post author, and we'll have a comma there. And what we're going to do is, let's see, I think this is still good, user data. So we will execute the base query, and we'll fill in the blanks here with the user data. Okay, so that should execute our query, but then we need to get the data. So if we just leave it like this, then SQL will know about our query, but we won't. So we want to know about our query too. We, I guess, being Python here. So we'll do again, could be a better name here maybe, but so we'll from the cursor we'll call the fetch all, because we expect potentially lots of results, and then we'll return author posts. Okay, so that should be basically it. Let's see, so that looks like it probably will work. So let's go ahead and we'll try running it. So in another window here, I'm going to run the server. I'll have to activate the virtual environment. So and let's run the cd. We'll go into the server and we'll run the server. So Python my server address is already in use. Okay, let me change the port number. You may have to, if you're running this a bunch of times, you may need to change the port number periodically. All right, so we'll try running it, and it runs. Okay, so it's hanging. So my server is now running. It's ready to take requests. It's basically running an infinite loop. Okay, so my server is running. So I can go ahead and try visiting it. So localhost 8000. All right. So we have our search page here. Looks like everything's working. And if I do a search for Bob, let's see what I get. Looks like I get Bob's 2 posts. So the first post and the second post. So obviously, if this were a real application, we could pretty this up a little bit, but that's the basic idea. So we'll go back and we'll do a search for Sally, and we just get her 1 post. We do a search for something that doesn't exist, we get nothing. So again, there's all kinds of cases that we're not dealing with, but this is I think a basic overview of the whole process. So we started with designing our schema, then we had to implement that in our kind of database ORM. Is not I guess it's not really ORM, but essentially in Django this would be your models, so the ORM. So we create our schema, we populate it with initial data, which would be optional. We're just using dummy data here, and then when we actually want to use it to run a query or to insert new data, if we get a new user signs up or creates a new post, we want to handle all that as well. But this is just one of the use cases. So that's that.